Alright, what's going on everyone? Kamigawa Neon Dynasty has arrived, and with it, we get 2 new pre-constructed commander decks. The purpose of this video isn't to go over every single individual card, as that will take a long time, but rather to give you a brief overview of how the decks work so you can decide which deck is best for you. I will leave links to the complete deck list below, so feel free to check the description for that. I'll also leave Amazon links if you're interested, though I encourage you, please do buy these at local game stores if possible. But yeah, let's just get right into it. First off, we have Upgrades Unleashed, which has Chishiro the Shattered Blade as the commander. It's a 4-mana 4/4 that will produce a 2/2 spirit token with menace every time you play an aura or equipment. Then at the end of turn, you will put a +1/+1 counter on every creature you control that is modified, which means any creature that has an aura, an equipment, or a counter on it. Now, you might think that this is an aura and equipment deck. After all, you get tokens when you play them, and you are partially right in that there is some of that, but actually it's much more focused on distributing +1/+1 counters. You're basically going wide with creatures, putting counters on all of them, and then your commander keeps dishing out more and more counters. So first off, we have like Hydras, Genesis Hydra, Ulash, is that how that's pronounced? And Rampant Rejuvenator. So Hydras naturally have counters, so they're already modified, right? You play a Genesis Hydra, it's modified to begin with because it has +1/+1 counters, meaning your commander will put +1/+1 counters on all of your Hydras every single turn, so that's pretty cool. There are also things like Champion of Lamholt, Taurian Mauler, and Forgotten Ancient. These all get counters constantly. They get counters every time certain kinds of spells are cast and stuff. So basically they just soak up counters naturally by themselves, but then with your commander, they're all going to get an extra counter every turn, so long as they have one, so that's pretty cool. And this is amplified even further with cards like Gruul, Rhythm of the Wild, and Invigorating Hot Spring. So Gruul is going to put an additional counter on every single creature you play. It technically only adds them to non-humans, but there's only 2 humans in the deck, so basically everything you play when Gruul is on the battlefield gets an extra counter, which guarantees that it's modified. Rhythm of the Wild does the same thing. It gives them Riot, which means you can either give them haste or a counter. So in this deck, counters are pretty useful. And likewise, the Hot Spring, it enters with 4 counters on it, and then it can put them on other creatures as they enter. And then it will grant haste to everything that's modified, which is going to be most of your deck, so that's pretty cool. So basically we have cards like Gruul distributing counters as things enter. We have creatures that naturally have counters or get counters as spells are played. And then we have a commander that's going to add even more counters on every single creature that's modified every single turn. So this deck is very snowball-y. Basically, if you can get a few things on the battlefield, they kind of grow exponentially. Things can get out of hand if your stuff can go unanswered. It's basically the idea behind this deck. And there's still some other really powerful creatures in this thing. Things like Krenko, Loyal Guardian, Primeval Protector. Krenko can spit out a ton of tokens. The Guardian puts counters on everything. It's basically doubled by your commander, right? The Guardian puts counters on everything every turn. The commander then adds extra counters every turn. The Protector does the same thing. It enters the battlefield, puts counters on everything, including all those tokens. And there are multiple ways to add tokens with this deck as well. So basically we can go wide with tokens. Our commander makes tokens, Krenko makes tokens. There's other things that make tokens. And then we have lots of ways to, distribute counters on all of them. And then the commander then continues to put more and more counters on them every turn. Of course, there are still some auras and equipment, notably things like Swiftfoot Boots, Black Blade Reforged, Bone Horde, all popular and powerful pieces of equipment in Commander. There are many auras, including things like One with Kami, Snake Umbra, Unquenchable Fury, so like the first can create a ton of tokens to soak up counters, the Umbra can protect an important threat, and Unquenchable Fury is kind of cool because it constantly returns to your hand, which allows you to recast it, which allows you to continue to make spirit tokens with your commander, so that's useful. There are also some really nice new cards that are designed specifically for this deck, things like Concord of the Kami, Ascended Acolyte, Aki Battle Squad. So the Concord, it basically encompasses all of the deck's themes into one card. It's about tokens, encounters, helps you draw, stuff like that. The Acolyte is kind of insane. It enters with a ton of counters based on how many counters you already have, and then it starts doubling its own counters every turn. So that's kind of crazy. And then the Battle Squad will give you multiple combat steps when you attack with a modified creature. So all pretty great, all perfectly on theme with this deck. And there's plenty we don't have time to talk about, plenty of ramp, lots of removal, great ways to draw cards, a few more crazy powerful creatures, but basically this deck is all about going super wide and super big, creating a bunch of tokens, dishing out a ton of +1/+1 counters, and then building a board of massive stompy creatures. Yes, there is an equipment and an aura theme, but mostly it's just about modification, counters, equipment, aura, whatever. Just make everything big and go smashing. That is the Upgrades Unleashed deck in a nutshell. If that sounds like your thing, definitely check out this deck. Our other deck is Buckle Up, an Azorius vehicle deck with Kotori, Pilot Prodigy at the helm. She reduces the cost of all your vehicles to 2, making them easier to animate into creatures. And then she will give an artifact creature lifelink and vigilance during combat. So not only are your vehicles easier to crew, but they'll get more powerful. So with an ability like that, you know what we're going to be doing with this deck, right? We want some big giant vehicles, things like Peace Walker Colossus, Parhelion 2, Shorakai. These are normally somewhat difficult to crew. Crew costs can be underestimated, like a crew cost of just like 3 or 4 can be kind of difficult. But with our commander, we only need 2 power to crew these, and they can have vigilance and lifelink as well when we attack. So not only are these huge, but we can make them very easy to animate into creatures. Also, Peace Walker Colossus can also help crew our other vehicles. That's nice. And the Shorakai, actually pretty cool. It generates a pilot token, and pilot tokens are really good at crewing vehicles, so that's pretty nice. Don't know how a vehicle is creating a pilot for itself. I guess it's the Genesis engine, so I guess that makes sense. But anyway, we don't have time to go over every vehicle, but the deck has a ton more. It has a Sky Sovereign, Weatherlight, Surgebreaker mech. The last is pretty cool. It's actually another payoff. It's a 5/5. It has Menace. It can be crewed for cheap with our commander, but when it enters the battlefield, it's going to deal damage based on double the number of vehicles we have. So it's a removal spell, potentially a huge removal spell, and also a decent creature. And yeah, just lots of vehicles. I think you get that. We also have some other vehicle synergies though with things like Aeronaut Admiral, Katsumasa, and Cyberdrive Awakener. So the Admiral just gives your vehicles flying, makes them more evasive, makes them more difficult to block, makes them a little bit scarier. The Animator can animate vehicles with mana, and it also distributes counters to them when they aren't crewed, so that's pretty cool. And the Awakener, it also gives your vehicles flying, but what's cool about this is when it enters the battlefield, it will animate all your artifacts. It does turn them into 4/4s, but having your entire garage, your entire hangar of vehicles, whatever, you're having all your vehicles just suddenly become creatures, and notably, not just your vehicles, but all your artifacts, your mana rocks and stuff, also gonna turn into 4/4s. And don't forget, the Awakener gives them all flying, so basically it enters and suddenly you just have this giant flying army. Even if it might reduce some of the power of some of the vehicles to 4/4s, you just get this big massive army for a turn. Pretty cool. And then afterwards, it still gives all your vehicles flying, so that's pretty great. Now, while crewing these big vehicles is cheap with this deck, we still have to cast them, right? We still have to cast them, and they're kind of expensive. Some of them are. So we do have ramp and cost reduction spells. Like for ramp, we have Gold and Silver Mirror, we have Vidalcan Engineer, all of which add mana, just trying to get to those big giant artifacts faster. We also have things like Ethereum Sculptor and Foundry Inspector, which will reduce the cost of all artifacts. So all of these just help us get to our stuff faster, so we can start smashing with big giant vehicles. And the great thing about most of these cards is they're all artifacts. Our ramp and cost reduction stuff, most of them are artifacts. So we have a lot of general artifact synergy cards as well, like Psy, SRAM, Master of Ethereum. Psy produces Thopters every time we play artifacts. SRAM draws cards, drawing's always great, and Master of Ethereum is a huge threat, has power and toughness equal to our artifact count, so even if our vehicles are offline and they can't be animated, they're going to pump up like Master of Ethereum and other similar cards. we have other ways to generate Thopters too. We have like Thopter Spy Network. Thopters are great at crewing vehicles. They're good at blocking while we're trying to kind of set up. They can also swarm the opponent. So we have multiple ways to make Thopters. Thopters can crew vehicles, and also we have ways to make them more powerful with things like Master of Ethereum. So there's lots of artifact synergies built into this vehicle deck. There are also some really powerful new cards designed for this deck, like Organic Extinction, Release to Memory, Kappa Cannoneer. The first is a board wipe that doesn't touch your artifact creatures, so that's nice. It's a mostly one-sided board wipe. There's some non-artifact creatures in our deck, but like for the most part, wipes all of our opponent's stuff, leaves our vehicles behind. That's nice. The second exiles a graveyard and then gives you an absolutely massive pile of spirits based on how many cards you exile, so that's pretty cool. And the turtle gets a counter every time you play an artifact. It's difficult to target with ward, and it's very easy to make it unblockable. So basically it kind of turns into this wrecking ball. It's just gonna get bigger and bigger and bigger. It's difficult to target, and then it just smashes face by getting a bunch of counters. There's also a ton of like really good like value generating cards in this deck. Like we have Emery, Hannah, and Tashar. So all of these let you constantly get artifacts and creatures back from the graveyard. And this combined with like all the trading you can do with tokens makes this deck really like grindy. It's a surprisingly grindy deck with cards like this, allowing you to just constantly recast artifacts from the graveyard. And naturally, there's plenty we don't have time to talk about, lots of removal, some really good card draw, like there's just a ton of exceptionally good card draw in this deck, and there's some other really cool, powerful things we didn't have time to go over, but the general idea is this is an artifact deck, but we have a focus on crewing very large vehicles. So if you like the sound of that, then maybe Buckle Up is the deck for you. And that's it. Be sure to let me know which deck you're most interested in the comments below. But in the meantime, thanks for watching. I hope this video was helpful, and I will see you in the next one.